Comrades, hello, greetings, and thank you for tuning in to WRFU 104.5 Radio Free Urbana. This is the inaugural episode of the Liberation Hour, a Marxist-Leninist talk show about current events, film, and theory, and I'm your host, Comrade Felicity. All right, let's get this started. How about that? So, top of the hour disclaimer is WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign online community. Views expressed are those of the speaker and are not intended to represent WRFU, UC, or IMC. And so, let's get this started, shall we? To begin, I'm going to go ahead and give a little breakdown of how this show is going to go. So we have two parts, 4 segments. The first part is news and current events. In this segment, we basically go over local news, a climate update. We talk about a couple things as it relates to budgets, just regular local stuff that any citizen would want to know. And then we do a segment song. We move on to national news. We talk about the big, beautiful bill. We talk about climate change on a national level. We talk about national elections. And then we go into the second part where I then talk about theory. This episode, we are talking about dialectical materialism, Marxist-Leninism, and how this relates to you in your life. And in the last segment, we do a film analysis. And in that segment, we're going to have a lovely speaker today, director Stephanie Black, on her film H2 Worker from 1991, where she talks about Jamaican migrant workers coming in on the H2 program to work on sugarcane fields in Florida. Obviously, it was pretty exploitative. It sucked pretty bad, and she's going to talk about it. With us today, she will be tuning in at around 7:45, so if you're interested, stick around and listen to Miss Stephanie Black. Next, let's go ahead and do a little climate update. So, most recently, there was actually an algae bloom in Mattoon, Illinois. As climate scientists often stress, the impacts of climate change aren't as simple as warmer weather. The harmful effects of the trend can take on diverse forms. Mattoon, Illinois recently encountered one such effect when its local reservoir experienced a dangerous algae bloom that made the water toxic, rendering it unfit for any kind of use. The Coles County Health Department working to try to fix the issue, but from July 13th to 18th, the water was unsafe to drink. Algae blooms of this kind are becoming increasingly common as climate change creates conditions unsuitable for the cyanobacterias, I believe that's how you say it, I could be wrong, that lead to harmful algae blooms forming in the freshwater repositories. The effects of HABs, that's like a HAB, go beyond the risks posed to people, animals, and aquatic ecosystems, but extend to the economy, property values, commercial and industrial fishing, and just people's daily lives. The residents of Mattoon were lining up for access to safe drinking water from local businesses and were scared of the impact it would have on them. And Rural King in Mattoon, which is one of the local businesses, said that they've donated several semi-truck loads of cases of water to the community. Those trucks have been parked at Williams Elementary School and Little Park for days as people drive through and get their allotted amount. Now, you might be wondering, how does this fit into the framework of Marxist-Leninism? Well, there's a few different things here. So when we talk about community care, from a Marxist-Leninist perspective, we're talking about worker solidarity, and we're talking about working people coming together for a common good. As it relates to the algae bloom, this is not going to become an unusual thing. We're going to be seeing a lot of this going forward. There was a really big event that happened back in 2014 over in Toledo, Ohio, in which a similar event happened in Lake Erie, in which people could not drink the water due to an algae bloom. This is only becoming more common as climate change persists, and communities must become more resilient. Resiliency is key here. We have to understand and recognize that climate change is going to come for all of us. We're all going to be affected. These are all things that we have to be aware of. And so in order to help fight these problems, coming together as communities and having solidarity, understanding that we're all starting at a different place. You may be an able-bodied person, but your neighbor may not be. You might be someone who has access to drinking water, but your neighbor might not. And so recognizing that there are people coming from different spots in life, and that could very well be you as well. And so understanding that things like an algae bloom are going to become more and more prevalent as the earth heats up and as we continue to neglect climate change, or not us, more the giant corporations who have been causing this harm for decades. They knew back in the 1950s that climate change was going to be a problem, and they simply didn't care. It was about making money. And, we can't change the past. We can't go back to the 1950s and tell them, bonk them on the head and say, you can't do that. But we can look to the future and say, how can we build a more resilient community? This means coming together, pooling funds to perhaps afford water for everyone, coming together to do kid drop-off and pickup as families struggle through this problem. Looking at the bigger picture here is really what we need to be doing. And this kind of brings me into the next segment, where we're going to be discussing the Illinois carbon sequestrian, I'm saying it wrong, sequestrian, we'll just move it, the ban. One strategy being developed right now to reduce greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere is carbon sequestration. Okay, I think I got it right this time. A process by which carbon is captured, compressed, and injected somewhere deep below the Earth's surface. While the strategy has the potential to be a crucial tool in the fight against climate change, there's very few test cases to study, making it difficult to fully account for the potential risks. Currently, there is a bill awaiting action from Governor J.B. Pritzker that would ban this from happening beneath sole source aquifers in the state like the Mahomet Aquifer in central Illinois, the primary water source of over 800,000 residents from the Iroquois to Cass County. There are currently multiple proposals for such projects in the works, one of which would likely come to fruition in the absence of the bill passing. It's not entirely clear what the best course of action in this situation is, but on the one hand, it's important to develop and utilize every tool in our arsenal to fight climate change. And on the other hand, this strategy could contradict other environmental considerations and provide a strategy to fossil fuel companies that allows them to continue their operations by providing them with a band-aid solution to reducing emissions. Another case where the capitalist mode of production is preventing development by hampering the rational experimentation and implementation of various technologies and strategies that would otherwise be able to be used for the good of society. Now you see, this is not an inherently bad practice. We can look at this and see the good that it can do for communities, but we have to remember that the overall problem, the root point here, is these giant companies that are causing massive amounts of carbon to be let out into the atmosphere, massive amounts of climate disaster, which we, the working people, have to endure. You know, we don't have the money to be able to escape such things. And so while I think that the carbon sequestration is a great idea, I would also like to see, more studies. I think that more people would like to see that, especially if it's going to be something implemented near you. The Mahomet Aquifer is huge. There was actually, I believe, a campaign for it on my college campus recently, I believe last year, to protect the Mahomet Aquifer, because it is so huge and it is such a plentiful source of water. These are things that we need to protect, and so it's important to look at something like this, this ban that would keep it from, I believe, mining under or going near the aquifer, and instead they would have to have specifications to ensure that it would not harm the fresh water source which we have access to. And this is just practices that need to go in place, mainly because of the fact that people need to come first always, and these companies will never let that happen. These companies will never care to do that for us, and so we must do it for each other. We must look at these situations and say, okay, how can we come together? And this is one of those things where through electoral politics and other such cases, we can make change. But don't get it twisted, this is not the only way that we can make a change in the climate crisis. And like I said, community first always. We need to look at these coming decades as a community-oriented kind of society. We can no longer afford to do just rabid individualism, trying to get up before the next person. That's just not how, that's not a sustainable solution for having a society which actually works and is working for everyone. And so moving on to the Urbana and Champaign new budgets. Both of the cities of Urbana and Champaign have adopted new budgets for the 2026 fiscal year. Both cities are indicating a decrease in both revenues and expenditures for the year, although Champaign's general fund decreased while Urbana's increased. Decreases in revenues can be chalked up to lower levels of consumer spending and the loss of federal and state funds. Decreases in expenses are largely due to the ending of capital improvement projects from years past. Both budgets also failed to address the systematic trend of funneling resources to public safety at the expense of other programs. Of the $5,609,563 of expenditures being added to the Champaign General Fund, $3,329,400 are going to public safety, although the police budget is taking up a slightly smaller percentage of the fund. It includes a $36,000 investment in drones for the police and fire departments. Meanwhile, Urbana wants to have its cake and eat it too by approving two more patrol officers to the payroll, claiming it will allow them to free up space to pursue the department's alternative policing programs. All of this while students right here in the University of Illinois are being repressed and harassed by local police for their political views, not to mention the drastic increase in funding for the security state at the national level as well. And I think this is really important to point out. I'm going to talk about this later when I talk about the strikes in Philadelphia, the sanitation strikes. But the amount of funding that the police get and overall, just city by city, is disproportionate. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I want to make this kind of clear. I'm not a hater on individuals who choose to join the force, especially those who join for noble reasons. I will say noble, yet a little naive, or a lot naive. The police force was founded on slave catching. We cannot deny this. And so while we allow it to exist in the way that it does, while we allow it to go without any checks and balances, while we allow more and more funding to go to the police, the less of that funding is actually going to public safety, actual public safety, not policing. Policing is surveillance. Policing is not public safety. There can be instances in which a police force can be good, but in this instance, in this capitalist society that we live in, that is not the case. Because the police are not actually here to protect us, the people, everyday people. They are here to protect profit and capital, and that's what they have always done. And they will not. They will continue to do so. While there are individuals within the policing force who can be good people, every cop goes home and kisses their mother on the cheek, right? That doesn't necessarily make them make the body that they work for a moral or just institution. And in fact, they have doled out so much harm that we cannot allow this to go unnoticed. I recently went to a protest for the Charlie Kirk, who came to Follinger Hall at the U of I back in April. And the amount of policing that was there just for like about 100 protesters, when there were about 3,000 to 5,000 people that showed up for Charlie Kirk, was insane. It made absolutely no sense. And it was purely there to intimidate people we were there for our rights, because Charlie Kirk is a white nationalist and they let him on campus. How is that okay? You know, and so when I look at this budget and I think, why is so much going to the police if all they do is dole out this kind of harm? And so these are things that we really need to think about when we talk about what are the next steps forward. You know, I just talked about climate change, and I talked about this budget, and it's like, where do we actually want to put our money towards? What do we actually want to do? Do we want to put our money towards sanitation, or do we want to put our money towards policing? And you know, what are the effects of that? We can see through empirical data and evidence that higher policing does not do any good. So the fact that they want to add more, quote unquote, patrol officers to the payroll, it's a waste. Truly, it's a waste. And this is just one of the many things that we need to think about. And we're getting to the end of this segment. And our next song for today is "Don't Go Near the Water" by the Beach Boys. Hey, okay, welcome back. We're going into the next segment. We're talking about current movements, organizing that's happening now. We can talk about local, we can talk about national. Let's go ahead and do a little deep dive into some rapid response networks. So I think you've probably seen it. We've all been seeing it. There's a lot of rapid response networks that have been going around to help those that are being abducted by ICE. And I do say abducted because this is completely illegal. Everything that's happening right now, people being abducted at their own immigration hearings, at work, at home, none of this is justified. And on TikTok and on social media, we've seen they have been absolutely instrumental in relaying immigration news and ICE sightings across the country. Neighbors and communities have been coming together to fight against the ICE abductions, which is amazing, honestly, to see. When Trump got elected, I know a lot of people were probably really scared, and as they should be. I was scared. I still am, and I know a lot of people are. And when we look at ICE coming into our communities all over social media, I've been seeing different videos, posts of people saying, watch out, ICE is, in downtown Urbana, ICE is in Chicago, ICE is in XYZ city, state. And this is the kind of mutual aid that we need to be doing when it comes to state repression, because the state will not stop. This is it. This is the Gestapo. When we talk about the secret police, ICE now has some of the biggest, at how many billions of dollars now do they have to be able to fund this? Billions upon billions of dollars are being funneled into ICE funding in order for them to carry out these kidnappings and abductions of just regular people, regular human beings who are just here to live. I'm not going to say regular workers, because they are more than just their work. They are human beings. And so that kind of leads me into unionization. If you like unions, raise your hand, because I sure know I love unions. Over here in Champaign, Urbana, actually, over at the U of I, the RA, research assistants, unionized, and they voted this last week. Over 35% of research assistants in the U of I's campus have signed membership cards or petitions stating that they want the GEO, also known as the Graduate Employees Organization, to be their bargaining representative. GEO, which represents approximately 2,700 teaching assistants, graduate assistants, and pre-professional graduate assistants at the U of I, are instrumental in ensuring that those employed by the U of I are, the groups that I just listed, are represented fairly. And this is extremely, extremely important, because the U of I, unlike any employer, is very inclined to exploit its labor. It has been doing this for years. And it's ridiculous, the fact that we have to, or not, I'm not a graduate teaching assistant or anything of that sort. I'm an undergrad, actually. But we as students should be looking at this situation and congratulating our research assistants for making such a huge stride, because them having representation, being able to be paid fairly, is the next step into holding the university accountable for its unfair practices. And furthermore, the GEO is the official venue through which TAs, GAs, and PGAs can negotiate with the university administration over their healthcare, wages, and other working conditions. We need to support these unions no matter what. We absolutely need to support these unions. For the people who make the university work the way it does, faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates, our conditions are tied directly to the quality of education and research that happens here. And that was a quote from the Daily Illini, written by last names Guard and Williams. And this is extremely important. We need to be listening to workers, working people who are part of unions, because unions are the backbone of this country. The more that we demonize and liberalize unions, the more power we give into the hands of fewer and fewer people who do not have our best interests at heart. And this kind of segues into the Philadelphia Sanitation Union strike. The District Council 33 went on strike starting on July 1st. It represents 9,000 blue-collar workers and is the city's largest blue-collar union. Quote, members of DC 33 work with the sanitation and water departments, as well as in roles such as 911 dispatchers, crossing guards, morgue employees, and airport staff, and more. And that's from CBS. They have been in labor talks since 2024, bargaining for an 8% increase. DC 33 is seeking an 8% pay increase every year for 4 years and healthcare benefits for all employees. That's also from CBS. They're in the lowest paid municipal union, earning an average of $46,000 a year, which is below the living wage in the city. And this is from Axios Philly. 3% annual wages, and the creation of a fifth pay scale step with a 2% pay bump and a $1,500 bonus this year is what they got after these last labor talks, and that is from Axios Philly. Now, let's break it down here real quick. Do you think that doctors are important? If you said no, you should probably click off of this. But if you said yes, which doctors are important for society, then you should and we should all be looking at sanitation workers as the preventative group, which keeps us from having to actually go to the doctor. Sanitation is extremely important. If you were paying attention in history class in the 7th grade, which I surely was not, but I do remember this one segment we talked about in which, I want to say, 17th century, 18th century probably, where, there was just crap and pee in the roads in London. People were getting sick left and right. This is how plague spreads. This is how disease spreads. And just the act of cleaning, the act of having a clean space, the act of being able to go outside and it's not filled with feces and all of these disgusting things that should not be on the streets, we are already much more likely to just not get sick. This isn't even counting when you get vaccinated, eat your veggies, take your vitamins, that kind of stuff. And so when I see that the Philadelphia sanitation workers, specifically in this district, but also across the city, and quite frankly across the nation, are just not getting paid what they are worth, what they are owed, that's pretty upsetting. That's pretty not great, honestly. And just to kind of give some, background or perhaps some more context here, the current yearly salary effective July 1st, 2023 for a police officer recruit in the police academy in Philadelphia is $64,982. That's almost $20,000 more a year than the average sanitation worker. What? And after graduating the academy as a police officer, you receive a pay increase of $69,492. And this is in Philadelphia. There are scheduled increases in pay to the present maximum of $93,888 a year. And that is from the Join Philly PD website. This isn't just random numbers. This is actually from their website. Now, again, I'm not going to bash individuals for making a living wage. You do you. But when we look at this and we can see objectively that Philadelphia sanitation workers are not getting paid their wage, what they deserve, what they need to live, not even just, they aren't even getting paid a living wage. This is extremely heartbreaking, first of all, but it's also really dangerous because these people are also facing extremely hazardous working conditions. There are stories that I read on these articles discussing the sanitation workers' conditions, in which they would talk about how there would be bags of, again, feces that would explode in their faces. They might have to go to the hospital. They might have to take a day off work, but they can't afford it because they're only making $46,000 a year in a city which is surely not cheap to live in. So this kind of brings me into affordability. In the primary election of Mr. Zoran Mamdani. Okay, guys, I'm not going to say that I am like a super big Zoran stan because he's not a socialist, as many like to say, as one of my favorite streamers, Hasanabi, likes to say. He is actually not a socialist, and we need to be realistic about this. But to kind of give some context here, on June 24th, 2025, Zoran Mamdani beat Andrew Cuomo in the Democratic primary. Andrew Cuomo, if you don't know, is the disgraced former New York governor. He's resigned in disgrace because he is a sex pest. He likes to go after younger women, and he's gross and weird. And he didn't actually renounce any of his actions on the debate stage. He just said that he would go visit Israel, which okay, I don't really know what you're trying to do with that, but okay, you're running for mayor of New York. And for Zoran, this is a huge win because not a lot of old guard Democrats, I don't think, were even really expecting this to happen. And shame on them, frankly, for not only their assumption that he couldn't win and that he wasn't going to win, but also of the fact that they don't think that working people are able to actually get out there and make our voices heard, which they absolutely can because they did. The amount of people who went and knocked on doors for Zoran Mamdani is insane. And when you actually see the sheer number of people in New York who wanted to go out and support, I mean, this is the kind of movement that we need happening. And I'm not talking just electoral politics. If anything, beyond electoral politics. I'm talking movement like what we've been seeing in people coming out, as I said, for their neighbors as they are being kidnapped by ICE, as we are experiencing the effects of climate change, as we are experiencing lower wages as a result of just institutions not wanting to pay us what we are worth because they would rather put that money towards the paychecks of CEOs and the cops. Like, let's be so for real right now. Zoran Mamdani is running on a campaign of practical politics, affordable housing, free buses for everyone, and free childcare. And you know how he's going to do it? He's going to tax the rich. They can't necessarily leave New York. They can try. But New York also happens to be, if you didn't know, a huge hub for people, business, industry, all kinds of things. You can't just necessarily pack up and leave if your entire business model and everything you need is in New York. And so he kind of hit the jackpot with this one, honestly. And we need to be pushing more people like Zoran Mamdani to go further left, to do socialism, to push for these things. And in fact, we are getting to the middle of the hour, and so this kind of cuts me off a little bit, but I was going to talk about Palestine. However, I think that the song that I have chosen for this segment will suffice. And that song would happen to be, sorry, there's an ad playing on YouTube. I thought we didn't have ads, but it's fine. Which happens to be You Always Want to Bomb the Middle East by Cheekface. Okay, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed some Cheekface, one of my favorite up-and-coming bands. You should definitely check them out. Now we're heading into the second part of the show. If you made it halfway through, thank you. Truly, thank you. I know this is my first time on air by myself, so it's been interesting. But if you are enjoying the show so far, thank you. Okay, so our next segment is we're going to be getting into the historical parts. We're going to be getting into the theory. Okay, I know that sounds like super boring, and to an extent it can be, but what I like to think about when I think of theory is just the theoretical basis for how we're kind of moving around in this world. When we talk about Marxism-Leninism and we're talking about a revolution, the theoretical basis for that is what we would call dialectical materialism. And yeah, that sounds super pretentious and academic, I get it, it absolutely does, but it does have an important meaning, and it is an important, I would say, theoretical basis for which we can actually understand communism, which is the practical carrying out of dialectical materialism. So it was coined, actually, the term was not coined by Marx or Engels. I know that it seems like Marx did all of the good things, but in fact, he did not coin the term. It was coined by Joseph, and he has a very German last name, Dietzgen? I could be getting that so wrong, and if so, Joseph, I'm sorry. And dialectical materialism is materialist, as it says in the second part of the name, which is actually opposite of idealism. I know that sounds kind of crazy because one of the main talking points against Marxist ideas is, well, you're just such an idealist. None of this could actually happen. This can't happen in reality, which is wrong. Sorry, that's just like, that's not a correct assumption. Like, that's not actually true. When we think about the materialist view of the world, we're often thinking about the material conditions as the basis. We're not looking at what could be, we're looking at what is right now. And dialectical materialism says, point blank, it is the method of reasoning which aims to understand things concretely in all of their movement, change, and interconnection, with their opposite and contradictory sides in unity. We can see dialectical materialism as basically saying there are no absolute truths. Something that I think a lot of people misunderstand about Marxist ideology and being a communist is people think, oh, you just want this idealized world in which it's a utopia and everything's perfect. That's not true, actually. I understand, and many other Marxist-Leninists, I would say most Marxist-Leninists, would agree with me on the fact that there is no such thing as a quote-unquote perfect society. Humans are imperfect beings. If we are the basis of society, it cannot be a perfect society. And so when we kind of move away from this idea that it's going to be perfect, we can actually look to something that's going to be real, concrete. We can look at, we can measure. And something that I want to bring up here is Darwin. Dialectics as well. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. Darwin actually used dialectics for his understanding of the world. He considered, for example, a formal thought would explain a fish is something with no legs which lives in the water. Darwin, however, considered fish dialectically. He said some of the animals living in the water were not fish, and some of the fish had legs, but it was the genesis, the genesis? It probably says genesis, of all the animals as part of a whole interconnected process which explained the nature of a fish. They came from something and are evolving into something else. As I said, there are no absolute truths. When we are looking at dialectics and we're looking at dialectical materialism more specifically, we are actually not trying to find a quote unquote like perfect way to be, but rather what it is right now with all of the perspective which we have access to. And so when I say dialectical materialism, the materialism part of this is essentially looking at the material world, our material conditions, what is happening right now that we can touch, feel, see, hear, all of those senses per se, which you can measure. This is actually directly opposed to metaphysics, which is a branch of philosophy dating back to the time of Aristotle, referring to the study of what is beyond the senses. By the 16th century, metaphysics became synonymous with ontology, the study of being or existence. And, okay, I'm not a complete metaphysics hater. I'm not going to sit here and crap all over metaphysics and say, like, this is the terrible, like, ideology. I see why people like metaphysics. But if anything, metaphysics is actually the idealized philosophy. It is actually the one which is idealism. Metaphysics is looking beyond our material world to try to see beyond those things. And there's a reason it's synonymous with, well, not necessarily synonymous. Became synonymous with ontology. Ontology is essentially about religion. That's kind of how I think of it. I'm no philosophy expert, and I could be getting that kind of mixed up. But when we are looking at metaphysics, we are looking at what could possibly be, and that's just kind of opposed to dialectical materialism. Dialectics is opposed to metaphysics. Dialectical materialism is not necessarily wholly opposed to metaphysics, but it is not really making a ton of concessions for it. And an interesting quote that I want to read out here is from Lenin. And he said, Marx deepened and developed philosophical materialism into the full and extended the cognition of nature to include the cognition of human society. His historical materialism was a great achievement in scientific thinking. The chaos and arbitrariness that had previously reigned in views on history and politics were replaced by a strikingly integral and harmonious scientific theory, which shows how, in consequence of the growth of productive forces, out of one system of social life, another and higher system develops. How capitalism, for instance, grows out of feudalism, just as man's knowledge reflects nature, i.e. developing matter, which exists independently of him. So man's social knowledge, i.e. his various views and doctrines, philosophical, religious, political, and so forth, reflects the economic system of society. Political institutions are a superstructure on the economic foundation. We see, for example, that the various political forms of the modern European states serve to strengthen the domination of the bourgeoisie over the proletariat. Marxist philosophy is a consummate philosophical materialism, which has provided mankind, and especially the working class, with powerful instruments of knowledge. And so let's kind of move into who was Marx? Who was Engels? Who were these people? I'm going to go kind of like a little speed run because we don't need to know every single thing about them. Marx was born on May 5th. Engels was born on November 28th. Engels was born in 1820, and Marx was born only 2 years prior in 1818. I believe they met in Manchester, England, where they started developing the Communist Manifesto, and they had already both previously been kind of like socialist movements were already kind of happening. But Marx and Engels, think about it this way. They were observers, and they saw what was happening, and they wrote about it in philosophical and scientific terms. Marx and Engels, as many believe, were extremely important thinkers of the time, as they really brought into fruition what people were feeling, what people were seeing and feeling and experiencing. They wrote about it. When we think about the Communist Manifesto, when we think about capital, this is simply a reflection of what they saw in working class struggle, and were writing about it. And so let's kind of go in these last 5 to 10 minutes of this segment before we bring Miss Stephanie Black on, the director of H2 Worker. Let's do some myth busting. Why not? First myth that many seem to hang on to a lot is that they were racist. This is complicated, but instructive. Marx and Engels were both expressed that, one, slavery was the basis of the great progress and culture of Britain and Romans, etc. Moreover, they often treated different ethnic groups, nations, etc. as sharing common characteristics, or as being agents or counter-agents of civilization. And three, finally, they expressed derogatory and racist views about individuals, especially LaSalle? I can't say that name right. I'm really bad at names, apparently. In private letters to each other. Then, at the same time, they viewed the U.S. Civil War as containing revolutionary elements of a class, i.e. slaves, freeing themselves. They defended the Sepoy Mutiny as a natural reaction to colonial barbarity, and supported the revolution of minor nationalities in Russia against Tsarist autocracy. How do we make sense of this? Marx and Engels, although using the language of progress and civilization, no different from the colonial apologists of this era, were referring to both the technical, scientific, and cultural progress, which colonial apologists propped up as the main thing, and the exploitation, degradation, and oppression, which colonial apologists tried to gloss over. Progress, for Marx and Engels, means the progressively more effective and efficient exploitation of labor. This higher level of exploitation creates the basis of scientific and technical progress. Moreover, the development of this exploitation to a higher level necessitates breaking down the boundaries between individual production, which forms the foundation of earlier forms of exploitation, into more collective forms of production, which then becomes the basis of modern socialism. So they were not saying necessarily that slavery is a good thing, or that it was quote-unquote progressive. They were simply saying that it was one of the many things which progressed us into capitalism and eventually, hopefully, socialism. Slavery is not a good thing. It was never a good thing, and it should never be endorsed as a good thing. But it was part of history, and as a part of labor history, as a means to understand, A, how colonialism actually works, and B, how Marx and Engels wrote about it at the time. Yes, they were white guys. We can't deny this. But this does not necessarily say that what they were philosophizing about and what they were theorizing about and experiencing and witnessing was somehow like inherently wrong. Marx and Engels, when they were talking about race and colonialism, we're often talking about it in the sense of scientific terms, trying to understand how do you parse out slavery as it relates to the rest of the economic system. And so slave revolts, which is actually a huge reason why the Civil War was inevitably going to happen, it was because of slavery, and it was because of the fact that enslaved people were no longer going to deal with these working conditions. Can't blame them, right? Because those conditions were terrible. So, when we're looking at Marx and Engels as figures, when we're looking at them as theorizers, as philosophers, and as some of the first leaders of communism, we have to see them as their whole. Were they perfect people? No. In no way were these people perfect people. But they did contribute so much to understanding the basis of, for example, the labor theory of value, which we will get into in later episodes. Marx and Engels were extremely important in understanding these things. And when we do identity politics, like I said, with, oh, well, they were just white men, how could they understand? We're really actually kind of doing ourselves a disservice by not looking at them, as we should all people, as the whole person. It is about 7:43, so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to play the song Bella Ciao, and we're going to bring on Miss Stephanie Black.
Hello?
Hello.
Are you on the air now?
I am, yes, ma'am. You are on the air.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hi.
Sorry about that. This is why we do a little 5-minute early before we do the interview, because I was figuring something might happen. So, it's great to have you on the show, Miss Stephanie.
Nice to be here. Congratulations to you on your first air date. I wish you the best.
Thank you. I appreciate it. As an introduction, Miss Stephanie Black is an accomplished filmmaker who won the Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize for her documentary film H2 Worker. She's also directed and produced award-winning documentary film Life in Debt in 2001, which was rated 3 out of 4 by Roger Ebert. It's a pretty big deal, Miss Black, who noted it as a harsh indictment but very persuasive. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yes. And so let's go ahead and get right on into the questions here, because I really loved your film H2 Worker, I have to say. It was not only a huge success, I have to say, but it was also so riveting to watch these people talk about their experiences in the H2 program. So can I ask you, what inspired you to direct H2 Worker and Life in Debt, and why do you think these topics are important?
Okay. Well, there's a decade between the two of them. I made both of them. I could say I made both of them because they both had information that I knew nothing about when I first encountered the subject matter. For H2 Worker, I was a student at NYU Film School, and they had a competition for a $10,000 grant. And I had met a migrant family, a Mexican migrant family that did the migrant stream, and I met them in Ohio where they were harvesting tomatoes, and they told me about how every night the farmer gave them TV dinners to eat, but they didn't have any stove to cook TV dinners. They had to cook them on top of a fire, and so there was this, horrible truth that you cannot cook a TV dinner on a open fire. And so I wrote a proposal, and I got the grant, and I followed this family to Florida, in the southern part of Florida where they were harvesting other crops. And I met a Haitian minister, and he said, "Do you want to see something?" And he brought me onto the camps, the sugarcane camps that were a good hour and a half north. And at that time, I didn't even know we were growing sugarcane in this country, to be honest, much less hand harvesting, much less having 10,000 men from the Caribbean flown up for 6 months every year to do it.
Right.
And to get into the camps, it was quite strange when you approach, because you drive down like a long road, where you don't expect to see anything, and then suddenly appears this barrack, which 3,000 men are living inside. And the only reason I was allowed to come onto the property was because I was with this minister, and he had frequented the camps and done services. And there was a cane cutter who looked at me with such despise. I remember that, and as if I was kind of part of the system that was endorsing this. And I remember that look. I at that moment I just said, okay, this is what I'm going to make this film about. And that, to answer your question, is how and why H2 Worker came about.
Yeah.
And
that's riveting, honestly, to hear. Of all of the stories I thought I would hear about how you were inspired, that was the last one I thought I was going to hear, because that's crazy. And so can you talk to me about what is the H2 program, and what's the exploitation exactly going on through this program?
Okay, well, basically the H2 program, it comes from the visa, the H2 visa that the workers get to come into the country for a temporary amount of time. And so the H2 worker it's a visa that the employer applies for through the Department of Labor when they cannot find an American worker who's willing to do the job. Right. And so that means that the worker's legal status in the country is under the control of the employer, which inherently creates a power imbalance that can often lead to the exploitation and the violation of normal workers' rights that we have in the country. And so right now, when I did the film, there was just one program called the H2 Worker. There was the H2 Worker program. Now there's two visas. There's one that's called the H-2A visa, which is specifically for agricultural employers to hire foreign workers for seasonal work in agriculture. And there's the H-2B program, which allows workers to come in for non-agricultural work, like, for example, working in restaurants or hotels, and those type of jobs. When I made the film, to give a context, when I made this film, which was shot like from 86 through 90, let's say, and came out in 1990, so 35 years ago, there were, at the time, 12,000 H2 workers coming into the country, about 10,000 coming in to cut sugarcane, and another 2,500 that were coming up north to do tobacco and apples. Now it's kind of incredible. In the H2A program, there's approximately 370,000 temporary foreign agricultural workers that are certified under the H2A program.
Wow.
And most of the workers come from Mexico and Honduras and Guatemala, and most of the agriculture work that they're doing is, it's throughout the country, but in Florida, California, and Georgia have the most temporary guest workers. And the H-2B program, which is for the non-agricultural workers, it has a cap of 66,000 temporary workers, because those are jobs that it's a little bit, the employer's a little bit more hard-pressed to prove that there isn't, a U.S. citizen who would want that job. But this year there's a cap at 66,000, but then there's kind of issues, overage issues that are issued, and now we're in the mid-year of 2025, and now there's 130,000 H-2B visas issued, with a lot of those workers coming from the Philippines. It's interesting. The folks from the Philippines can do H-2B work, but they're not allowed to do H-2A work. I don't know what the reason is. And so the program has really grown, despite the fact that we're no longer using hand harvesters in Florida to harvest sugar cane. We only use hand harvesters to plant a seed cane. They figured out a way to mechanically harvest, but it's incredible how we've replaced a huge portion of American workers with H2 workers in agriculture, because one could imagine if you're living on the property of the farmer, and they're controlling your right to be in the country, your visa is contingent on your employer, that might be a preferable worker for the employer for all the wrong reasons.
Right. It's complete control. And we're getting up to time here, but I want to ask you, that was a wonderful summary of everything that's been going on with the H2 program, and I think it's extremely important to understand exactly how, labor is, all of the ins and outs and the inner workings of, labor exploitation, and the fact that it's not just... we as Americans don't fully understand the labor exploitation that's happening in this country, because largely for American citizens it's not necessarily always happening to us in the same way as those who are being flown in specifically for work, like what the H2 worker program is doing. And so my last question for you here is, if there is one thing you would want people to take away from this film, what would it be?
From you mean from Life and Death, or an H2 worker, or from
I would say H2 worker.
From H2 worker, well, I guess one
There's
thing
a lot.
is hard.
There's a lot to take away from the film.
I mean, I think I guess for me the main takeaway would be it's often a question of who's telling the story, basically, and how the program is presented. The problem with the workers who are brought in, they don't have voting rights in this country, so the farmers do have voting rights in the country, and they can contribute to different campaigns and such. So the workers, it's a large working force, but effectively they don't have representation, and they don't have rights, and if they do complain, they're at risk at being terminated, quite easily. So I guess that would be the takeaway, that it's a question of who's telling the story.
That's a really good note to end this segment on, because I think it's extremely important, especially this is something that you highlight in your film. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, please go watch it, where Miss Black really interviews a lot of different people, and you can kind of just see, like, you can almost, it's the exploitation is palpable. Like, I can, when you're interviewing these different stakeholders, you can see that the CEOs at the very top truly do not care about what happens to the Jamaican people. They are in it purely to make as much money as possible. And I think that your expose on the program is phenomenal, and congratulations. Even though it came out 30 years ago, it was absolutely lovely to watch.
Oh, that's nice that you say that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you for coming on the show, Miss Stephanie Black. Folks, that's Miss Stephanie Black. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take good care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
All right, folks, and that brings us to the end of the show. Our last song for today is actually from the H2 Worker soundtrack. It is called H2 Worker. I said that with an accent. I probably shouldn't have. And it is by Muta Baruka, who is a singer-songwriter from Jamaica, in which he wrote about the H2 Worker program in this song. It is playing right now.